Hello, students. This week we're going to step back a little bit from our focus on AutoCAD, and we're going to talk in general about some different topics in technical drawing. In this video, I'm going to cover dimensioning. Now, we already talked last week about how to draw dimensions and control them in AutoCAD, but today I'm going to give a broader overview of how we draw dimensions, why we draw dimensions, where you draw dimensions, and some of the drafting standards that you need to know to correctly place those dimensions on your drawings. Then in the next video, we're going to cover interior elevations because your final project asks you to draw an interior elevation, but you may not know what this is. And so we're going to cover, again, kind of the same range of questions. What is an interior elevation? How do you draw it? Why do you draw it? And some of the drafting conventions and drafting standards used for interior elevations. Backing up just slightly, you'll remember this slide from last week about annotation objects. What is annotation? Annotation is the way that you add information to your drawing. It's notes and explanation, and it can provide information about a feature such as the length, diameter, or calling you to a specific detail. So today we're going to focus in on one specific type of annotation. We're going to talk about dimensions, and here's one right here. So what is dimensioning, and why do we use dimensions? So dimensions add numerical values to your drawing, and you put them on there in order to accurately locate and size various objects in your building. Dimensions are required. There's not a single drawing out there that doesn't include some kind of dimensions. They're required on all construction drawings, and in general, because remember, we're doing technical drawing here, the dimensions really have to be accurate, they have to be complete, and they need to be readable. So here's an example of a drawing that has dimensions. And you can see right here, this is the dimension line. This piece right here is called an extension line, and it runs from the dimension line to the object that it's actually dimensioning. Notice that it doesn't touch, it's held off a certain amount. This is to avoid confusion as to where exactly the object starts and finishes. The dimension line has these slash marks or ticks. You might hear them called architectural ticks to start where to show where the dimension starts and ends. So it's got a tick here and a tick there. When you place dimensions on a drawing, such as a floor plan, you need to follow a hierarchical sequence. So we've got overall dimensions, such as this one right here. It's a long dimension showing the overall length of the, what is this, the residence, okay? And then we've got some secondary dimensions that are calling out intermediate locations in the floor plan, and they're going to be set in the overall dimension. So here's the overall dimension, and then in one rank is a second line of dimensions. Okay, and then in again are even smaller dimensions. So closest to your building or your wall or your object here are going to be the smallest level of dimensions, and then step up to some larger dimensions that you want to call out. And finally, on the outside will be the overall or the dimension that runs the entire length of your building or object. In case you really couldn't see that last slide, I kind of zoomed in on the same slide, and let's talk about this with a different example. Here is um, a side of the building that has been dimensioned. Last time we were talking about over here. And so we can see this is the overall dimension. It's the longest one and gives the full length of this particular wing of the building. And so we step in and we get these slightly smaller string of dimensions, and we step in again and get even smaller. So we're defining smaller and smaller pieces of the building every time we step in with our dimensions. Now, when you place your dimensions on your drawing, it may not always be exactly clear what that dimension is particularly pointing to. For example, let's take a look at this floor plan dimension right here. It says 6 foot 1.5 inches, and its tick marks are marking right here at the edge of this wall, and then here at the inside face of this bathroom wall. But it turns out that most of the time architects run their dimensions to the finished face of the framing material or the stud inside the wall, not to the actual finish face of the wall, which is the sheetrock or the gypboard. And that's because of the construction sequence. When the contractor lays out the walls in order to build them, it's easier if the dimensions are actually running to the studs, which they're placing right then, rather than the sheetrock or the gypboard that's actually going to be installed later, much later after the walls are already in place. So that's why you'll often see in architectural sets, way in the beginning in the notes section, a note telling us exactly what they mean by each dimension. Another option is to dimension to the center line of walls. This is popular because it is easy to understand. Right? Everybody can see quickly and easily that you're measuring to a center line rather than referring to some note off somewhere about whether you're measuring to the finish face or of the finished face of the wall or the finished face of the framing. All right, so a center line is going to look like, let's see, there's one somewhere on this drawing. Here's one right here. A center line measurement is going to look like this. Okay, the line that's actually to the center of something will be a long dash, long dash, short dash, and it will have this CL center line symbol. So let's take a look at another example. And what I really want to call out here is that your dimensions should in general be placed outside of the rooms or outside of your floor plan. So here's a floor plan of a, oh boy, it looks like a dentist office. All right. And so you can see that there's a lot of information inside the rooms. And therefore, we really like to pull the dimensions outside of the rooms. Okay, and here are the dimension lines. Here's the example of the center line technique right here, center line. And notice that the dimension lines are a reasonably thin line weight. Okay, but the ticks, or sometimes if you use arrows, are quite a bit thicker, and that really makes them stand out graphically and be very easy to read. Now, you can't always place all of your dimensions outside of a floor plan. It's very rare that you can pull everything out and still be readable. So if you need to make an interior string of dimensions, that's fine. All right, but in general, as much as you can, pull them outside of your drawing. So this illustration here is just to revisit the point that you group these dimensions hierarchically. So you work from the overall dimension of the exterior walls, right here, overall dimension. into smaller and smaller groupings. So the next section might be some major wall jogs or changes or major wall dimensions, and the next interior line might locate all of the walls, doors, and windows. Sometimes, for some of your smaller dimensions, the actual text that you want to include doesn't fit between the tick marks. It's too wide. And in that case, we pop the text outside of the dimension. And it's very common to include a leader line. It could be an angled leader line, or in this example, they used a curved leader line. So let's take a look right here. This dimension of 1 foot 3.5 inches is too wide. The text itself is too wide to fit within these two extension lines. So they've popped the text out of that location and used a leader line to indicate, to go from where the text is to the dimension line that that goes with it. All right, here's another example right here of 1 foot 0 inches, and here's the leader line. And I think, oh, here's another example. This one has several examples right there. Now this is, by the way, to bring this back to AutoCAD, this is one of AutoCAD's settings in your dimension styles to control exactly how this happens. All right, I hope you found that really useful in dimensions in general, but now let's narrow it down and talk about your final project. So if you refer to your final project requirements, I asked you to add dimensions. I want you to dimension the major walls, all right? So, and that will end up being approximately the length and width of each room. I also want you to include those overall dimensions for the house, and I want you to title, it doesn't have anything to do with dimensions, but just to remind you, I want you to title each room. This is not shown in the textbook example. So the textbook example is this Hotel Tutorial 5. All right, all they have is one dimension in each direction for the entire piece. Now they're not doing a whole house, they're just doing one. But for example, they didn't dimension any of these major interior walls. They also didn't label their rooms. So let's take a look at a different example. And this is how I'd like you to do it for your final project. First of all, I'd like each room titled. For example, bedroom, master bedroom, closet, great room, sitting room, whatever it is. All right, make up a name and title your room. Next, I'd like you to provide at least 2 levels of dimensions, and go ahead and do 3 levels if you are ambitious or have a lot of information to share. So I definitely want the overall level of dimensions, so the overall length and width of your home. And I want you to at least provide this next level of dimensions, which will be the major rooms, the major walls in your home. All right. And so that way you give a lot of information about the construction of your home. Thanks, everyone. In this video, we covered how, why, when to use dimensions, and really dug into how they are a tool for communication in your technical drawings.